So this is chapter 1 of Jordan Peterson's 12 rules for life. Like we talked about in the last video, stay motivated and keep on working towards a goal. Don't get complacent during this time. This chapter is really interesting, especially for younger people, because it has a lot to do with the dating scene. But even more than that, you can use the same principles in the professional world as well. So it all has to do with the dominance hierarchy, or as Jordan Peterson likes to put it, the competence hierarchy. Because that's essentially what it is. Dominance hierarchy, that sounds kind of outdated, more in the primal days where you used more dominance. Now, in a lot of fields, especially in business, sales, entrepreneurship, that dominance warrior spirit is still needed. However, as we're going to talk about through this chapter, the people who use aggression and bullying tactics may become leaders, but they will soon be overthrown by people who have better intentions. And so competence hierarchy is a way better way of putting it, because nowadays things are more about information. We're moving into the age of information. So if you have this book, go through it. I'm going to cover some of the key points, and then I'm going to talk about how that can help you in the professional and the dating world as well. So on page 4, he says, over the millennia, animals who must cohabit with others in the same territories have in consequence learned many tricks to establish dominance, while risking the least amount of possible damage. A defeated wolf, for example, will roll over on his back, exposing its throat to the victor, who will not then deign to tear it out. The now dominant wolf may still require a future hunting partner, after all, even one as pathetic as his now defeated foe. Bearded dragons, remarkable social lizards, have their front legs peaceably at one another to indicate their wish for continued social harmony. Dolphins produce specialized sound pulses while hunting and during other times of high excitement to reduce potential conflict among dominant and subordinate group members. Such behavior is endemic in the community of living things. Lobsters, scuttling around on the ocean floor, are no exception. If you catch a few dozen and transport them to a new location, you can observe their status-forming rituals and techniques. Each lobster will first begin to explore the new territory, partly to map its details and partly to find a good place for shelter. Lobsters learn a lot about where they live, and they remember what they learn. If you startle one near its nest, it will quickly zip back and hide there. If you startle it some distance away, however, it will immediately dart towards the nearest suitable shelter, previously identified and now remembered. A lobster needs a safe hiding place to rest, free from predators and the forces of nature. Furthermore, as lobsters grow, they molt, or they shed their shells, which leaves them soft and vulnerable for extended periods of time. A burrow under a rock makes a good lobster home, particularly if it is located where shells and other detritus can be dragged into place to cover the entrance, once the lobster is snugly ensconced inside. However, there may be only a small number of high-quality shelters or hiding places in each new territory. They are scarce and valuable. Other lobsters continually seek them out. This means that lobsters often encounter one another when out exploring. Researchers have demonstrated that even a lobster raised in isolation knows what to do when such a thing happens. It's a complex defensive and aggressive behaviors built right into its nervous system. It begins to dance around like a boxer, opening and raising its claws, moving backward, forward, and side to side, mirroring its opponent, waving its opened claws back and forth. At the same time, it employs special jets under its eyes to direct streams of liquid at its opponent. The liquid spray contains a mix of chemicals that tell the other lobster about its size, sex, health, and mood. Sometimes, One lobster can tell immediately from the display of the claw size that it is much smaller than its opponent, and will back down without a fight. The chemical information exchanged in the spray can have the same effect, convincing a less healthy or less aggressive lobster to retreat. That's dispute level 1. If the two lobsters are very close in size and apparent ability, however, or if the exchange of liquid has been insufficiently informative, they will proceed to dispute resolution level 2. With antenna whipping madly and claws folded downward, one will advance and the other retreat. Then the defender will advance and the aggressor retreat. After a couple of rounds of this behavior, the more nervous of the lobsters may feel that continuing is not in his best interest. He will flick his tail reflexively, dart backwards, and vanish to try his luck elsewhere. If neither blinks, however, the lobster moves to level 3, which involves genuine combat. This time the now enraged lobsters come at each other viciously, with their claws extended to grapple. Each tries to flip the other on its back. A successfully flipped lobster will conclude that its opponent is capable of inflicting serious damage. It generally gives up and leaves, although it harbors intense resentment and gossips endlessly about the victor behind its back. If neither can overturn the other, or if one will not quit despite being flipped, the lobster moves to level 4. Doing so involves extreme risk and is not something to be engaged in without forethought. One or both lobsters will emerge damaged from the ensuing fray, perhaps fatally. The animals advance on each other with increasing speed. Their claws are open so they can grab a leg or antenna or an eye stalk or anything else exposed and vulnerable. Once a body part has been successfully grabbed, the grabber will tail flick backwards, sharply, with claw clamped firmly shut, and try to tear it off. Disputes that have escalated to this point typically create a clear winner and loser. The loser is unlikely to survive, particularly if he or she remains in the territory occupied by the winner, now a mortal enemy. In the aftermath of a losing battle, regardless of how aggressively a lobster has behaved, it becomes unwilling to fight further, even against another previously defeated opponent. A vanquished competitor loses confidence, sometimes 4 days. Sometimes the defeat can have even more severe consequences. If a dominant lobster is badly defeated, its brain basically dissolves. Then it grows a new subordinate brain, one more appropriate to its new lowly position. Its original brain just isn't sophisticated to manage the transformation from king to bottom dog without virtually complete dissolution and regrowth. Anyone who has experienced a painful transformation after a serious defeat in romance or career may feel some sense of kinship with the once successful crustacean. Okay, I'm going to stop here and talk about sports for 1 minute. We can talk about Patriots football. You know, Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, they've been on a really, really, really good tear. And now, of course, putting all the allegations aside, they're good. They're very, very good. They have momentum on their side and they're confident. And you can tell that, you know, Bill Belichick is confident because he doesn't feel like he really needs to give a lot of explanation. And then Tom Brady is just confident because you can see that he has fire and he's on the sidelines motivating his guys, you know, always on them if they're messing up, not to put them down, but just to keep them in check and uplift the standard of the team. And you can see the talent of the wide receivers that go to that football team are never that great. I mean, there's a lot of average players, not a whole lot of superstars, but they end up having phenomenal years through that team. And so you can see that the same concept here with the crustaceans, with the lobsters, how they win and then they have that confidence and they are not going to back down to a challenge when the next one comes up. And I'm going to talk about why based off of the neurons, the brain chemistry, and how that plays an effect. And so Another example that you can see this play out is with fighters, with Floyd Mayweather, or with some of the, let's say Conor McGregor. They're very, very, very confident. And you can tell that it's not a false confidence, because you can tell when somebody is being false, when they're being phony. All it takes is a little bit of bicker back and forth or a quick shove, and then they will quickly go to a submissive stance. But these guys are guys who live to fight. And so I'm going to go back to the book here and talk about brain chemistry. A lobster with high levels of serotonin and low levels of octopamine is a cocky, strutting sort of shellfish, much less likely to back down when challenged. This is because serotonin helps regulate postural flexion. A flexed lobster extends its appendages so that it can look tall and dangerous, like Clint Eastwood in a spaghetti western. When a lobster that has just lost a battle is exposed to serotonin, it will stretch itself out, advance even on former victors, and fight longer and harder. The drugs prescribed to depressed human beings, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, have much the same chemical and behavioral effect. And one of the more staggering demonstrations of the evolutionary continuity of life on Earth, Prozac even cheers up lobsters. High serotonin, low octopamine characterizes the victor, the opposite neurochemical configuration. A high ratio of octopamine to serotonin produces a defeated-looking, scrunched-up, inhibited, drooping, sulky sort of lobster, very likely to hang around a street corners, and to vanish at the first hint of trouble. Serotonin and octopamine also regulate the tail flick reflex, which serves to propel a lobster rapidly backwards when it needs to escape. Less, prov- provoc- less provocation is necessary to trigger that reflex in a defeated lobster. You can see an echo of that in the heightened startle reflex characteristic of the soldier or battered child with post-traumatic stress disorder. All right, I'm going to stop here. Now, why does this play so much with dating in the professional world? Well, when you're thrown into those hierarchies, you are not just there to share your knowledge. You're not just there working on a skill. You're also working within an environment. You have to coexist with other people. And so other people are going to form some sort of groups. So they're going to create allies. And that's where office politics comes into play. And so when you learn how to navigate through different disputes without being unscathed, you can walk around more confidently. And this is one reason why a lot of people are going the solo route into entrepreneurship. Because in entrepreneurship, you are competing against other people, but you're not there physically for them to destroy your energy, to destroy your focus. And so they're kind of in competition with themselves. Entrepreneurs form groups with trusted allies where they can do things on their own and they don't have to be around people that they don't necessarily want to. And this also plays a key role in understanding the dating scene. Sometimes you might be out and about. So let's say you're a male and you're with a female, and you might go out and then you might wonder, why is it that certain males are approaching you with certain different behaviors, where if you weren't in that situation, they would approach you just regularly. But because you're in this dating scene, now they're approaching you as either a threat or somebody who's not a threat. So that all has to do with, you know, I'm not going to get into it too much, but it all has to do with sexual market value. So when you're young, there's a couple reasons why you get into relationships. Usually, when you're really young, you do it for how it looks. So, let's say in high school, you do it for the popularity. And so, because a certain person makes you look a certain way, it increases your status amongst your peers. And the whole goal is to have special favors because of that. Maybe you make more money. Maybe you have to do less work that you don't want to because other people are willing to do the work for you now that you have an increased value. There are many, many different ways. And so I would say for somebody who is on the bad end of the stick, who has been beaten down, you can use this to understand why that has happened. Because because a lot of people who are bullied, they don't quite understand why they're bullied. They don't. And so you have to understand that usually if another man is really picking on you, it's because he's jealous in some way. He's trying to put you in your place in some way so that he can have access to the majority of the women. And I'm going to talk about the Pareto distribution of how certain men get about, let's see, what is it? I can talk about it right here. I'm on the page. Vilfredo Pareto, an Italian polymath, noticed its applicability to wealth distribution in the early 20th century, and it appears true for every society ever studied, regardless of governmental form. It also applies to the population of cities. A very small number have almost all the people, the mass of heavenly bodies. A very small number hoard all the matter, and the frequency of words in a language. 90% of communication occurs just using 500 words among many other things. Sometimes it is known as the Matthew Principle, derived from what might be the harshest statement ever attributed to Christ. To those who have everything, more will be given. From those who have nothing, everything will be taken. And so that has to do with the dominance hierarchy, but it also has to do with what's it called? Hypergamy. So what I'm about to talk about in the next paragraph is going to explain the behaviors of women. And you can try and fight it, and you can try and say that it's not fair that women have their pick at the top, uh, the most resourceful men, and it seems like men have to do all the work, and then women kind of just swoop in and take that. But it is how it is. Hypergamy is very real, and that just says that women go for men who are more resourceful, who have more power, who have more access to certain people. So their network is larger. And so, based off of what we just talked about, that's because those men have gone into battle of some form. You know, in modern day context, they have outwitted other men, or they have networks properly. And then, of course, part of that is physical as well. You have to have a physical presence. People have to be somewhat intimidated and respect you as another man. And so that plays a huge role in professional development. And so Jordan Peterson talks about the female lobsters, which is basically the same behavior amongst all living organisms. The female lobsters, who also fight hard for territory during the explicitly maternal stages of their existence, identify the top guy quickly and become irresistibly attracted to him. This is a brilliant strategy in my estimation. It's also one used by females of many different species, including humans. Instead of undertaking the computationally difficult task of identifying the best man, the females outsource the problem to the machine-like calculations of the dominance hierarchy. They let the males fight it out and peel their paramours from the top. This is very much what happens with the stock market pricing, where the value of any particular enterprise is determined through the competition of all. When the females are ready to shed their shells and soften up a bit, they become interested in mating. They start hanging around the dominant lobster's pad, spraying attractive scents and aphrodisiacs towards him, trying to seduce him. His aggression has made him successful, so he's likely to react in a dominant, irritable manner. Furthermore, he's large, healthy, and powerful. It's no easy task to switch his attention from fighting to mating. If properly charmed, however, he will change his behavior towards the female. This is the lobster equivalent of 50 Shades of Grey, the fastest selling paperback of all time, and the eternal Beauty and the Beast plot of archetypal romance. This is the pattern of behavior continually represented in the sexually explicit literary fantasies that are as popular among women as provocative images of naked women are among men. It should be pointed out, however, that sheer physical power is an unstable basis on which to found lasting dominance, as the Dutch primatologist Frans de Waal has taken pains to demonstrate. Among the chimp troops he studied, males who were successful in the longer term had to buttress their physical prowess with more sophisticated attributes. Even the most brutal chimp despot can be taken down, after all, by two opponents, each 3/4 as mean. In consequence, males who stay on top longer are those who form reciprocal coalitions with their lower status compatriots, and who pay careful attention to the troops' females and their infants. The political ploy of baby kissing is literally millions of years old, but lobsters are still comparatively primitive, so the bare plot elements of Beast and Beauty suffice to them. Now, the reason why I put so much emphasis on the chimpanzee troops is because we have seen many, many very successful men get dethroned because either other men of lower rank have outnumbered them, or women have risen up and taken them out of positions of power. And so you see a lot of that happening, unfortunately, with rape accusations and other sort of. Now, that's not to say that a lot of men are not guilty of that, of course, but we all know that a lot of them are false. A lot of men have been accused of that falsely, and that has to do with hypergamy. Those men were in the dominant position within that particular hierarchy, therefore, those women were attracted to that man and having sex with that man in order to move up and have special favors within the hierarchy. But as soon as that man did not provide what they were looking for, they decided to uprise against him for multiple reasons. Okay, now I'm going to talk about this portion of this chapter, and it's going to help you to work on your physical body to become strong. And it doesn't mean to be a bodybuilder, it just means to be firm enough where you know that you can fight. Because as Jordan Peterson has mentioned in some of his lectures, is in order to understand evil, you have to understand your own capability of evil. Those who do not will always fall victim. This is why many empathic people get into relationships with psychopathic people, because the psychopathic people look at them as easy prey. And and it's not always that extreme. um so when I was in the military, I had just joined at 18, and I had no idea about some of the extreme conditions of the world. You know, you see it in movies and on video, but because you're not living in that scenario, you don't adapt to it. You don't personally learn from it. And so, what his meaning is to understand evil and understand your own capability of evil so that you can fight people with ill intentions came into play. Because when I was thrown into that, I saw how bad certain terrorist groups can be. And now that I see that I have been trained to fight them, I see that it does not take much for me to also be pushed to that capability to kill another person. So you know, you have to understand that everybody, and I don't care how sweet you are, everybody has bad, aggressive, violent traits in them. And the people who are out in society who cause havoc, who are murderers, who are rapists, who are robbers, those are people who are a threat. And so if you suppress your own violent and aggressive behavior, then you will not know your own evil. So you will not be able to defend yourself when that evil is presented to you. You understand? In order to fight fire, you have to understand your own fire. And so in this, he says, sometimes people are bullied because they can't fight back. This can happen to people who are weaker physically than their opponents. This is one of the most common reasons for bullying experienced by children. Even the toughest of 6-year-olds is no match for someone who is 9. A lot of that power differential disappears in adulthood. However, with the rough stabilization and matching of physical size, with the exception of that pertaining to men and women, with the formal typically larger and stronger, particularly in the upper body, as well as the increased penalties generally applied in adulthood to those who insist upon continuing with physical intimidation. So, as we know, and I know personally, in the military, there are a lot of leaders who use physical intimidation. However, those leaders are always ostracized after they have been in long enough. They are given just enough time to realize that nobody respects their leadership, and some adapt to that and they understand their own faults and they build new characteristics and they seek out people who can help them and they rise to greater power. You also see this with, I know a lot of buddies who I played football with in high school. They are known to be more aggressive when they get into the workplace. Those people can find more success in certain competence hierarchies than others. So they usually go to more warehouse type of jobs, jobs where you don't have to use as much emotional intelligence. But for those who go into jobs where you do have to use emotional intelligence, you either adapt or you do not rise to power. And he goes on to say, naive, harmless people usually guide their perceptions and actions with a few simple axioms. People are basically good. No one really wants to hurt anyone else. The threat, and certainly the use of force, physical or otherwise, is wrong. These axioms collapse, or worse, in the presence of individuals who are generally malevolent. Worse means that naive beliefs can become a positive invitation to abuse, because those who aim to harm have become specialized to prey on people who think precisely such things. Under such conditions, the axioms of harmlessness must be retooled. In my clinical practice, I often draw the attention of my clients who think that good people never become angry to the stark realities of their own resentments. No one likes to be pushed around, but people often put up with it for too long. So I get them to see the resentment first as anger, and then as an indication that something needs to be said, if not done, not least because honesty demands it. Then I get them to see such action as part of the force that holds tyranny at bay, at the social level as much as the individual. Many bureaucracies have petty authoritarians within them, generating unnecessary rules and procedures simply to express and cement power. Such people produce powerful undercurrents of resentment around them, which, if expressed, would limit their expression of pathological power. It is in this manner that the willingness of the individual to stand up for him or herself protects everyone from the corruption of society. When naive people discover the capacity for anger within themselves, they are shocked, sometimes severely. A profound example of that can be found in the susceptibility of new soldiers to post-traumatic stress disorder, which often occurs because of something they watch themselves doing rather than because of something that has happened to them. They react like the monsters they can be truly in extreme battlefield conditions, and the revelation of that capacity undoes their world. And no wonder. Perhaps they assumed that all of history's terrible perpetrators were people totally unlike themselves. Perhaps they were never able to see within themselves the capacity for oppression and bullying, and perhaps their capacity for assertion and success as well. I have had clients who were terrified into literally years of daily hysterical convulsions by the sheer look of malevolence on their attackers' faces. Such individuals typically come from hyper-sheltered families where nothing terrible is allowed to exist and everything is fairy tale wonderful. So I'm going to talk about what I talked about in the overture when he went over the yin and yang, and to walk in the middle of chaos and order is the path to divine way. And what I used was an example of people who work for the system: doctors, police officers, firefighters, politicians, so on and so forth. Because these are people who are presented with real world problems every single day. And so you are not naive to the potential harms that are out in the world. Yes, everybody wants to look at the glass half full, and everybody wants to think that life is like the movies and that everything is perfect, but that is an easy way to be quickly mistaken and to be taken advantage of. And in order to become successful, it has to do with the phrase of the more problems you solve, the more you make, or the more successful you become. And in order to solve problems, you have to seek the problems. You have to look where the negativity is, where the chaos is. And so, what Jordan Peterson is talking about is that people who are naive, who are sort of willfully ignorant, but not in a negative way, they just want to be young and happy and carefree. These are the type of people who usually don't reach their highest potential unless they go into, certain uh, fields of work. And so this also has to do with dating. The reason why hypergamy is the way it is because from the age of 18 to roughly 28, women are looking to reproduce and start a family. That is their peak. That is where their eggs are the most fertile. And so they're looking for a man who has more resources. And if that man is the same age, then it's no problem. However, the majority of men who fit the role, who meet the checklist to take care of a family, are usually those who are older. And so you can see that some people naively get into relationships with people, and that throws their life off. You know, I don't know if you guys believe in astrology, but I highly recommend that if you do not, that you look into it. And I'm not talking about daily horoscopes, because as far as I'm concerned, that's all made up. But as far as the characteristics go and who you are compatible with, it is absolutely 100% accurate. You can look at all of the people who you have had the best relationships with in the past before you even knew about astrology. And you will see that the majority of your best friends, the majority of your best relationships were those who were compatible with you. And so once you start to learn that, it all pieces together. And then you can use that as a framework for somebody who you would want to start a family with. Because I see a lot, some of my buddies already have gotten into relationships and they've started a family, but neither of them get along anymore, and they're only doing it for the child. And the divorce statistic will say that before the age of 30, they're likely going to get a divorce, which then has a negative impact on the children. And so I think that if there was more awareness, more education on this at a young age, people would make wiser decisions. So if you are a guy listening to this and you allow a woman to bring you in, there's usually a reason for that. There's usually, if she wants to settle and she's set on settling, that means that she wants marriage, commitment, and to start a family. There's very few women from the age of 18 to 28 who want to settle down just for the sake of settling down without any intention. If it's over a couple of years and you have not shown any intention, then it's going to be cut off. So you have to understand that you have to be ready for that. And in the circumstance of a lot of my buddies who were not, they were sideswiped. Okay, that's where the phrase pussy whipped comes into play. When women are ready, just like it said here with the lobsters, they will become more submissive. The lobsters will shed themselves of their shell, and then they will mate with the man, and then the lobster woman will harden back up in her shell and go and take care of the younger lobster. And so at that point in time, that male lobster has done his duty. He has passed his genetic code off and given that woman the uh, the honor of reproducing. However, the long-term implications of that may be positive or negative, depending on those two adults being able to work together. And then if you're a woman watching this, then understand that if you're putting pressure on a man to settle down with you and you haven't even figured out if you actually like him, then that's kind of shame on you, because you're kind of being selfish, where you're putting pressure on him and you know that you don't really like him, but you're doing it anyway. And I've seen a lot of women do this because they're either too lazy to go out and find one, or they don't think that they can do any better, because maybe the man that they have attracted at this point in time looks a certain way or has a certain amount of resources. And so that's the only reason why she's reproducing with that man. But again, she might not even like him personally. So to use a man specifically for that is not okay. Not okay. And Jordan Peterson explains that here as well. And this is why a lot of young and naive men have their houses taken away, because when a woman sees a man who doesn't quote unquote have a purpose in life, she will give him a purpose. And his new purpose will be to essentially be a slave to her and to the children. And when she decides that that man no longer suits her, she will then use hypergamy to find another man. And this is why many men end up losing their homes, because they are naive to this. They are not taught properly how to get into dating and relationships. So again, uh, astrology, as as um, as corny as it may sound, is very, very, very useful for the long-term success of your relationship. You know, they say a lucky man and a lucky woman is one who settles with their best friend. So in all, this chapter, to stand up straight with your shoulders back, is to accept the terrible responsibility of life with eyes wide open. It means deciding to voluntarily transform the chaos of potential into the realities of habitable order. It means adopting the burden of self conscious vulnerability and accepting the end of the unconscious paradise of childhood, where finitude and mortality are only dimly comprehended. It means willingly undertaking the sacrifices necessary to generate a productive and meaningful reality. It means acting to please God in the ancient language. To stand up straight with your shoulders back means building the ark that protects the world from the flood, guiding your people through the deserts after they have escaped tyranny, making your way away from comfortable home and country, and speaking the prophetic word of those who ignore the widows and children. It means shouldering the cross that marks the X, the place where you and being intersect so terribly. It means casting dead, rigid, and too tyrannical order back into the chaos in which it was generated. It means withstanding the ensuing uncertainty and establishing, in consequence, a better, more meaningful, and more productive order. Okay, so I'm going to end off by talking about certain aspects of the dominance hierarchy. Now, let's say you grew up in a family and you have established a certain hierarchy. Many people are stuck within family relations that they don't truly like. Usually, this has to do with the lower ranking members, so the younger children are more often known to rebel after a certain amount of years because they have their whole life been put back into their place. And so when they go out into the world with high hopes and expectations, they are still treated like a child whenever they go back into that hierarchy of their family. And due to that, they may just decide to break off from that hierarchy altogether. And that is because they have been essentially oppressed. Now, not the kind of oppression on the extreme end of slavery or, you know, women's rights, but oppression on a small scale from people who they truly respected and cared for. And so their whole life, they were not trained to be leaders. When you look out into the world at all the top leaders, usually those are the oldest children within the family. And that has to do with the amount of attention that the parents have given that older child, and they have put the most amount of resources in developing that old child so that they can be the role model for the other children in the family. And if you study that and you truly look at that amongst very different families, you will see that that is true. And so the same concept is true in your hierarchy of friends or at a certain work environment. Many millennials are known to switch their work environments, not necessarily because they don't like what the company stands for, but because of the people within that environment. And you can say that, you know, that's on the individual, they should just figure it out, and if they were really capable, they would make it. And in some circumstances, that is true. But in a lot of circumstances, people who are very, very skilled, very capable, even more capable than leaders, are oppressed. And that also has to do with the ability of those people to coexist and to get along. So if there's already a certain structure set up where they have a firm clique, and you come in and you don't quite fit in with that clique, even if you are very skilled, they will oppress you. And when you study the psychological effects that has on people, it tears them apart. It tears very intelligent people apart because they do not understand the social dynamic of it. Many, 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 many very, very intelligent people are smart analytically, they're smart book wise, but they're not smart socially. They're not smart street wise. So that's where um, these frameworks within the book can help you, because you end up becoming what others view you as if you accept their label. And this is one reason why I'm a big advocate of entrepreneurship, even if you go into a formal job to start your own venture. Because when you start your own venture, you go through those struggles on your own and you learn a lot about yourself, and that can carry over into your formal work. And you can also take off with that new adventure as well, and you aren't boxed in and you aren't told how you can think. Because this is very important. If you have a lot of self respect, then you have to go outside of the confines that other people have put you in. Because believe it or not, you will mold into what other people want you to become. This is why a lot of people are not satisfied when they leave college and they go out into the workforce, because they have spent so much time learning, and they might be years below somebody who never went to college, only because that person has established good relations. But that new college graduate might be way more skilled, but the structure of that hierarchy may be designed to continuously oppress that individual so that they don't get any ideas of trying to outwork them, because those leaders view them as a potential threat. And that happens a lot more than you would think. So that is chapter one. Continue to progress and take some of this stuff into consideration.